one of the most important life skills that anybody can develop is focus and concentration. I know when I try and figure out an idea for a book that I'm writing, and I give it an hour and then I distract and I go away, I lose something. But if I dig for 4 or 5 hours for 10 days into this one problem, like a madman, obsessed with it, I get somewhere, I get some truth to it, And Steve Jobs, the person that we venerate, he was the master of that. Unfortunately, the person who ironically created the iPhone that's driving us all crazy, but he would close his door, leave me alone for 24 hours, I'm going to think this through. You don't realize the power that you have with your brain when you focus on something simple for enough time. It's like a drill boring into a piece of wood. You got to keep on boring and boring and boring until you get all the way through.
The question that people ask now is they go like, how do I find my passion? How do I find what my life's task? How do I find what I'm meant to do? But what I take from your work is that it's actually the opposite. You already know. It's already there. You've been thinking about this. It's been inside you from maybe even your earliest days. And so it's really more of an uncovering or a looking backwards. It's not you have to go out and experiment and explore. You were doing that earlier in your life, and then people told you no, or you told yourself that that wasn't feasible or practical or you weren't good enough. So you already actually know that. And it's really about going back to that. I mean, that was... I wanted to be a writer. I knew that I loved books. I loved books. And I loved writers. I just don't think I knew that I could be one, or I believed that I could be one. And I spent a good chunk of my 20s doing everything but that thing. And so part of that epiphany for me, looking around and going, I don't want to be like these people, was going, well, who do I want to be like? Oh, it's people like you. And the decision to actually pursue it was really what I was doing. I already knew what I wanted to pursue. It was giving myself permission and then having the courage and the commitment to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not what you think it is. It's not like anything really specific. It's not even intellectual. It's kind of emotional and visceral. So there's a book that I always recommend for people who feel a little bit lost in this area. It's called The 5 Frames of Mind by Howard Gardner. It's a really great book. And he shows that there are these 5 essential forms of intelligence. And we live in a culture that kind of tends to overvalue intellectual intelligence. But there are many other very human forms of intelligence. There is kinetic intelligence, which involves the movement of your body, which means a lot of people go into sports or dancing. There is pattern intelligence, which leads to kind of mathematics or to music. There's verbal intelligence, like I was attracted to. There's social intelligence, being drawn to people and figuring them out. I don't remember what the 5th one is, excuse me.
It wasn't yours. It's not your form of intelligence.
No,
so you tuned it out. Yeah.
There was one thing, when I was a kid, they would make you take these exams, and it was some kind of abstract thing that had to do with, I think it was like mechanical intelligence. Boy, was I bad at that, My dad could fix anything with his hands. I can't fix anything. So you got to figure out the one thing that you're good at and the 4 others that you're not good at. And once you have that one thing, it's fantastic. And then you kind of create maybe a plan for your life that involves figuring out that direction that you're going to take. I deal with this with a lot with people when I did consulting, and it's a fascinating process to take people back, as you say, back into their childhood, back into who they are, and discovering some of those things that have been buried deep within.
I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier about sort of the tuning out, the sort of space you have to create to do what it is that you're meant to do. And I think you've always been an example of someone who does that well to me. It's been inspiring and in other cases shaming, because you're so good at it. Like I need to be more like Robert. I don't want to say you're hard to get a hold of, but you're hard to get a hold of because you're so locked into what you're doing. You're not. I think by design, not easily accessible. Right? That's part of the.
I never thought of myself that way.
No, you keep space around you to protect the work that you're doing, right?
Well, it's, as I said, I dealt with a lot of failure in my life. And I didn't reach success until I was pretty old, almost 40 years old. And so that taught me a lot about focus and concentration. Once I was given the chance to write the 48 Laws of Power, and believe me, before that I was a very depressed young man. I even had moments that I was suicidal. And I got that opportunity. I'm not going to let go of this. There's nothing else that's more important to me in life. I'm going to it's get rich or die trying, to quote 50, right? Sure. And so I put everything into it. And once that worked, it was like entering, Aladdin's cave or whatever that thing is called. Sure. It was fantastic. I could work for myself. I'm not going to let that go. I'm not going to let people distract me. I'm not going to let people come in and say, Robert, can you start helping me with this other project that will earn you lots of money, but that isn't what I'm really excited about? I got fascistic about it. I love those hours with myself writing books. It's right now, because I can't swim and I can't hike and I can't run. Those 4 hours when I'm in my office writing my new book, it's like bliss for me, and I'm not going to let anybody interrupt that, not even you.
Well, and then the added benefit is sort of becomes this feedback loop where people think you're hard to get a hold of. Not you, but I do the same thing. Then they don't bother. I don't want to bother you. You create the reputation that helps. But I think about, it's true in writing, but I think it's true in a lot of forms of life, is like you get really good at something, you become successful at that thing, and now all of a sudden you have a lot of demands on your time that take you away from that thing, which is the main, not just the source of fulfillment for you, but also the driver of your actual success. So I know a lot of writers who don't have time to write because they're speaking or traveling or consulting, or they're designing their vacation home or whatever. There's all these things that come up, and this is true for CEOs, right? You're asked to be on this charitable board, and then people want you to invest in these other companies, and then you have these, all of a sudden, you're not actually sitting there thinking about what's our 5-year plan, what's our 10-year plan, what's the thing that's going to destroy us, what's the next big idea. And so it's this process in life of, as you get good at something, the world almost conspires to make you weaker at that thing. And you have to have an immense amount of discipline and will, and you also have to have a deep love of that thing. So you find, someone's a great comedian, they become successful in Hollywood, now Hollywood wants them to act. And their actual act atrophies because they're not getting up on stage.
They want to be a director and then a producer and then
So if you don't love the thing, you're going to be tempted to say yes because of the money and the adulation, and also because it's hard. It's hard to be staring at the blank page or starting from zero or doing the thing. So how do you think about cultivating that discipline?
Well, I know probably one of the most important life skills that anybody can develop is focus and concentration. I know when I try and figure out an idea for a book that I'm writing, and I give it an hour and then I distract and I go away, I lose something. But if I dig for 4 or 5 hours for 10 days into this one problem, like a madman obsessed with it, I get somewhere. I get some truth to it. And Steve Jobs, the person that we venerate, he was the master of that. Unfortunately, the person who ironically created the iPhone that's driving us all crazy, but he would close his door, leave me alone for 24 hours. I'm going to think this through. You don't realize the power that you have with your brain when you focus on something simple for enough time. It's like a drill boring into a piece of wood. You got to keep on boring and boring and boring until you get all the way through. It's almost impossible these days, and it's why I find a lot of books are quite frankly not very good, and I'm not trying to elevate myself in comparison, but
the sales do that enough. The sales make the statement about how much better your books are, so I think we're good.
But I could see that. I could feel the writer being distracted. I could feel him.
It's surface level.
Vacation home. Yes. I can feel him doing something. The thing doesn't have that energy that pushes all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Cal Newport calls it deep work, the ability to do deep work.
What's that?
Cal Newport, he's great. I think you would like him, but he does great stuff. But he calls it deep work, and that if you're a knowledge worker, which most people are these days, right? The ability to have deep pockets of uninterrupted focus, to really throw everything you have at a problem, that's what you're being paid for. That's how you separate yourself. That's how you come up with something new. And yeah, people aren't willing to do it, or they're not trained enough to do it, and it shows in the final product.
But you almost can't blame people because the world is full of so many distractions. It's almost like, you know how in basketball, somebody's shooting a free throw and everyone's standing behind like waving their flags to try and distract them? Yeah. That's what the world is doing to you right now. They're like waving their arms trying to distract you so you miss that shot, you know?
But the good news is the people who have practiced their free throws and practiced the ability to tune that out are the ones who can play professionally, and the ones who get distracted by that, or they they just want to play one-on-one because that's more stimulating and fun. When the game is on the line, they can't do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what kind of fascinates me. It happened more now since my stroke, where I suffered brain damage. And I'm very aware of my brain all of the time and what doesn't function and what does function. But it made me realize that the brain just controls everything that you do. It creates your reality, right? But the brain has this inherent power to it. And it's like this gift that's given to you. It's almost magical. And that's sort of what I wrote Mastery about. And I even went very deep into the neuroscience of it. And the neuroscience of it is the human being is designed to work on something and go deep into it and figure out the answer to a problem through focus, through persistence. I mean, that's what Thomas Edison said. It's all persistence. It's all energy. It's the degree of your aspiration that matters. And I just wish teachers were teaching that to their children nowadays.
Yeah, I wrote about Thomas Edison in The Obstacle Is the Way. You recommended this amazing biography about him. One of Robert's rules, you always look for the older biography. You found me this long, out-of-print, worn biography. And I remember what I was struck by is, in the 1870s, the idea of what the light bulb was actually sort of out there in the world. People knew the basic rudimentary technology, the idea it was going to be this vacuum-sealed glass bulb, there was a filament, and electricity would run through the filament. Edison's greatness was not any of that. He came to that concept later than those other inventors. What Edison did was figure out what the filament would be. And he tests like 6,000 different filaments. And it's not just he says, hey, give me 6,000 things. He dispatches these agents all over the world to try these different things. And then once he finds all 6,000, he tests all of them. At one point he tests hair from his beard. He tests all these different filaments, and he has this idea that it's not just that it has to work. He says it has to work for at least 1,000 hours. He has some sense of what makes it commercially viable. And then that's only the first problem.
It's got to light New York.
How do you deliver electricity to a fucking city block, right? Like, that's never been done before. And then so he has this second idea of borrowing the gas lines that are there to deliver it, and then he has to come up with how you actually generate the activity. So Edison, like I think most great people, really is an incredible problem solver, and he locks on to something, and once he locks on, he doesn't give it up. I contrast him with, or compare him to Ulysses S. Grant in The Obstacles of the Way. His famous line, I propose to fight it out on this line all summer. That's what wins the Civil War, right? There've been smarter generals before, but Grant goes, this is what we're doing, and we're not leaving until it's done. And that determination and will and focus is really the determining factor.
Also, I hate to say it, a touch of madness.
Yes.
Like, it's kind of what Edison did was mad. everyone thought he was crazy. And in fact, it was a little bit crazy. He was totally OCD about this thing. But having a little touch of madness, where it is kind of also boldness, where you're willing to do something that everyone's laughing at, that they think that you can't do, and you pull it off. So it's not all just rationality and thinking. It's energy and a sense of madness and boldness, like I'm going to do something that nobody else has done before.
Well, and that madness is a double-edged sword, Edison being a great example of it. Doesn't he waste like a decade of his life with these experiments with like cement or something? Like he would sometimes go down blind alleys, right? So that determination, you're pushing past the doubts, the reservations, the overwhelming evidence. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately, if you're trying to solve complex, entrenched problems, you have to be so fascinated and love it. Like when I talk to people, they say, I want to write a book. I go, that's not enough. Want is not enough. I say you should only write a book because you can't not write it. Like it's painful to not do it. And that almost doing it is like a kind of a relief. Like you've been, the Greeks would talk about was a daemon, like this sort of demon that is haunting you. And I mean, sometimes it's guiding you, but it's also, it's a demon, it's there, and you've been touched by that madness.
Yeah, very much so.
So one last thing on distraction. I feel like one of the ways you combat the distraction, you lock in the task, I think it's also partly how you design your days, your life, your routine. So it's not just you just wake up and you're great at what you do, but I think, I know a little bit about your daily routine. Like for me, it's about waking up early. I don't get sucked into my phone. I go outside. I take a walk. I do my journaling. For me, it's walking myself into that kind of creative, concentrative stillness, paradoxically, often with a form of movement. Then the exercise I do later in the day. The way I design my days is what's creating both the mindset and the time to throw myself at these problems day in and day out.
Do you think sometimes, I know I struggle with this, you can be too focused, you can be too, you don't allow something else into your life, that you're kind of heading down this one funnel, and sometimes, I remember Paul Graham was telling me this, sometimes somebody from the outside sees the solution. You're so focused on something that you're not able to pull back and see other perspectives. You're not able to enjoy yourself, to relax sometimes. I'm a big believer in putting in productive downtime in your life. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but there are things that I waste my time on, and I'm very proud that I do waste my time on, right? Like certain sports websites, what do I get from that? I get nothing.
Sure.
But I take my brain off of this thing, and it kind of relaxes me, and I find it very